Okay, so this is the overview, and these are the ones that I tend to get hung up on trying to do everything. So I'll try to do it really as an overview, because all of this stuff that's listed here you're going to work on in the different chapters as we go through it. The objectives, the versions of Windows 7 you want, but if you do take their testing, they tend to ask about which version does what, and there are lots of them. We all get hung up on professional and enterprise and ultimate, those kinds of things. There are some more basic ones, starter, and I've got a slide in here that was done for a Microsoft course that I'll use it, and then we'll go through, and there'll be a whole bunch of slides behind it basically say the same thing, so we'll get through those relatively quickly. New features of Windows 7, and what they're really talking about, the new features of Windows 7 is versus Windows XP. And everybody knows you can't upgrade from XP to 7. You have to migrate. And they've got the migration process. I guess we did that in A+. There's a video there for the migration process if you forgot what it is. It's not anything big deal. But the big deal, there is a big deal. The big deal is you got to reinstall all your applications. So if you go from one to the other, and as students have graduated and gone on to businesses, a number of businesses are just now migrating from XP to Windows 7. They skipped Vista. If you really want to go through the upgrade process, you can upgrade from XP to Vista, and then upgrade from Vista to Windows 7. And then you can upgrade from Windows 7 to Windows 8, right? And then you can upgrade from Windows 8 to Windows 8.1 if you want to go through that process. Frequently, they recommend that you do a fresh install, because if you have any issues at all with an operating system, upgrading doesn't fix it. All upgrading does is upgrade the problem, so that the same issue exists in the new. And the process, the Windows process, is really the same ever since like Windows 95. Except Windows 95 didn't have the permissions that we'll have in the NTFS file system when we get there. What they really, my opinion, my word, tend to do is do the same stuff. They just move stuff around so that we can look like fools when you go try it. Can't find this, can't find that, because they moved where it wasn't. And they did one, I forgot what it was. They changed, I guess it was remote desktop. They even changed in one of the service packs that went from one location to the other. So what it does tends to be the same. Windows 7, and most of you use it, is probably the best operating system, and I say that because Windows 8 is really just a new face on Windows 7. Maybe not, but it kind of is. And if you don't like I digress, but if you don't like not having the real start menu, Windows 8.1, I know Stephen put that on, they got this button that says start. What it does is flips back and forth.
It's the button that looks like a little bit Windows thing.
Yeah, but all it does is flip back and forth. If you really want to start menu, get Classic Shell. Classic Shell, free, open source. Start, you get your programs, right-click on your computer, you can do the properties and all that other stuff. There are a number of them out there. The first one I put on really was just a menu. I right-clicked on my computer and it gave me the properties of the application instead of going in and doing the configuration. But Classic Shell seems to work pretty well. And oh, by the way, it'll start the system in the start menu instead of in the interface formerly known as Metro or whatever they're calling it today. Understanding the Windows 7 user interface, I don't think any of you have any problem with that, because the user interface you use every day, you have done that, been there, done that. By the way, when you get to doing these virtual machines, these are not simulators. These are computers. They do everything that computers do. You'll get an automatic IP address, and that's the default. You'll get should get an IP address. I say you will. You should. I checked. As long as I got them on the right network. You'll get an IP address automatically when the system starts up. And you'll be able to get off of the network onto the Internet and use the machine. You really don't want to do Internet because they're not all that fast. You won't have to register it because Windows 7 allows you to use it for 30 days up front without buying it. And we're not going to really need it that long. And you can extend that up to 180 days. So it's one of those that you really can try it out. If you try it out and it really expires, then you get to start all over with whatever you were doing with all of your everything. So the user interface, hardware requirements, and I think that's the one that Terry was trying to do while we were doing the startup. What are the hardware requirements of these things? And this is always a good testing point, and it can be the different one. And the 32-bit and the 64-bit have a little bit different hardware requirements. Then we get into what do you have to have for Aero and all the clever, fancy stuff that they've added to it when we do that thing. Application support built into Windows 7. Identify essential connectivity applications using Windows 7. There are some kind of neat things that they have built in there. Has anybody used the problem step recorder? The who? Problem step recorder, what it does, if you want to make a step-by-step document for somebody, do the problem step recorder and then go do whatever you do, and it'll record all your steps. And then you can send it to somebody. And they have a little guide on how to do whatever it is. And they've added another thing. One of my favorites, quite honestly, is the snipping tool, which allows you to take a picture of part or all of the screen, whatever you need to do. But it's a handy thing to have, too. Networking models supported by different versions of Windows 7, and this is the models themselves are going to be like home groups, home networking, work group sharing, and then domain, and we'll talk about those a little bit when we get there. This is the slide that came from Microsoft and the different versions. You notice we do have several, and these are kind of broken down, but they are broken down to different areas where you might use these things. Consumers, Windows 7 Home Premium, a standard consumer edition, doesn't include the business features. The business features are things like the ability to join a domain, which we might want to do. Businesses use professional and enterprise, obviously, enthusiast, ultimate, enterprises, and enterprises business, depending on the size of the business. Windows 7 Enterprise, entry-level PCs, Windows 7 Starter, in emerging markets, Windows 7 Home Basic. Each of these have different requirements, different abilities to do things. What we're going to start out with, I hope, is the starter. This is going to start at the bottom and work its way up. The starter edition for small form PCs only. So 32-bit. Features the Windows Taskbar search, the ability to join a home group, not a domain. Home group, anybody used home group? Home group, me too. Home group allows you to share within your own home network, computer to computer, simply by using we'll call it a pre-shared key for Terry because he's doing security, but by sharing a password. And you go into the control panel, a machine creates the home group, everybody else can join it by simply knowing the password. And then you can share resources. Video sharing is what a lot of people do with it. When they've got a movie that you want to share back and forth, or files or a photo that you want to share within your own network, you can use that. And it is a pretty handy thing to do. So this can join a home group. It cannot create a home group. Action Center, Device Stage, Fax Scan, a lot of the other things. The one that they're always going to say is secure, reliable, and supported operating system. Supported means that Microsoft's still supporting it. Support does go away for operating systems over time because they can't support everything forever. For instance, DOS is not supported anymore. Windows 2000 is not supported anymore. I don't think the XP support's gone away yet, but I'm going to swear it did. They tried to drop that a couple of years ago, and then the Australian government got involved, and they said, okay, we'll keep supporting it for whatever. And I don't remember when the date is. It's soon that they're going to stop supporting Windows XP. But as we go through these things, as we work our way up, and we go from Windows Starter to Windows Home Basic will start with all of this stuff, and then we'll add features to it. So each of them has everything that the one below it has when we go to those things. So Windows Home Basic has everything that the starter has for value PCs in emerging markets, meant for accessing. When we get down here, no limit on the number of programs you can run, and the previous version did. Live thumbnail previews, advanced networking support, ad hoc wireless network. So we've added some feature from the starter to the Windows Home Basic. The Windows Home Premium, standard edition for customers, and that's what came on my laptop, probably what comes on most laptops right now. If you get Windows 7. I know Windows 8's coming on them now. Windows Aero Glass, which it's really kind of cool, right? It's got all of that stuff that you can kind of see through. Takes resources. Depends on whether you want it to look pretty or whether you want it to run fast. You can turn that on or turn that off. Navigation in Aero, Windows Touch, multi-touch, and handwriting support is available in it. The ability to create, now we can create a home group. So this version can create the home group that the other ones can join. With ease of sharing across all networks, DVD, video playback, Windows Media Center, snipping tools, sticky notes, Windows Journal, Windows Slideshow. So it has everything that the lower level editions had, plus these things here. Notice that one of the things it doesn't say is the ability to join a domain. And it doesn't have the ability to join a domain. One of the other things that it doesn't have the ability to do is you can't remote desktop to it. You can remote desktop from it to something else, but you can't manage it remotely. When we go to the professional, business-focused core business features such as domain join and group policy. So now we can make these a member of a Windows Active Directory domain. Protection of network backup and encrypted file system. We can now encrypt files on the machine. Ability to print the right printer in a home network with a location-aware remote desktop host and offline folders. Remote desktop host means that I can now connect remotely to it, not just from it. So this is the first one that you could actually manage remotely. Windows Virtual PC and Windows XP mode. Virtual PC, it's built into this one. Windows XP mode, when it first came out, I said, oh, this is just a virtual machine. Well, it kind of is. It's a virtual machine running on it, but it's a virtual machine that gets integrated into the Windows 7, such that if you have applications, and there probably really aren't that many anymore, that will only run on a Windows XP machine. You can run on a virtual machine, but you can put it into the start menu of your Windows 7 machine so that it shows up in your start menu and will actually run on the virtual PC. So up to Windows 7 Professional. Windows 7 Enterprise, business focused. Some of the machines in this room I think are professional and some of them are enterprise. We started putting Enterprise on and they told us to do professional, so we went to professional. BitLocker and BitLocker to go. BitLocker is the ability to encrypt the entire hard drive. BitLocker to go is kind of cool because you can now encrypt your USB drive so that if you drop it and somebody finds it, your data is protected. So that's kind of a handy thing, and that's added into Enterprise, and that's going to be available in Enterprise and Ultimate. Enterprise and Ultimate are basically the same operating system. App Locker allows us to control applications, and we'll do some of that. What can users do and not do? You can prevent particular users from running particular programs or permit them to run particular programs. Direct access allows you to connect from outside to inside. I think one of the things that kind of bothers me with this is to do that you're going to have to poke a hole in your firewall. We do that a lot anyway, and there are other programs that will allow you to remotely access your machine. TeamViewer is one that I've been using lately that is free and can give you access. It just has to be installed on both machines so that I could, if I've got it installed in the machines online, I could sit down here and manage my computer at home from this machine right here. I can do a remote desktop to it using TeamViewer. It's free for personal use. It's pay for corporate use. But it is a handy thing, and I think you'll find out as you start managing these things, and you come in here and say, Windows 7, I've been using Windows 7 for X years, and you know a lot about it. What we're looking at in this course, Windows 7, is not managing it at home, but managing it on a larger scale on a network. How are we going to put applications on it? How are we going to install it on 150 or 300 or 6,000 computers over the weekend? That's a lot of DVDs if you don't know how to do it. And it's also a lot of time. If you know how to do it, not so much so. Branch cache, this is something that's really specific. They added in here because it's available. That's specific to Active Directory. What Windows 2008 has is we've kind of gone forward in reverse. Has a what's called a read-only domain controller. Domain controller is a centralized server that has usernames and passwords, the authentication server. The read-only one doesn't allow changes, and you send. It has to communicate. What branch cache does is allows you to cache information at remote locations on a Windows XP machine. For instance, and I've said that read-only and all that other good stuff, if stuff were centrally located, for instance, if all of our stuff was centrally located at Virginia Beach, how long would it take you to open a Word document? A while. But if Josh opened the Word document and now John wants to open the Word document instead of going to Virginia Beach, Josh has it cached, then John can get it directly from his machine. So this allows that type of caching. Worldwide interface of languages, enterprise search scopes, virtual desktop infrastructure, and the ability to boot from a virtual hard drive. We did this once just to see if we could do it, and yes, you can. You can create a virtual hard drive, and instead of doing a dual boot with a physical drive, you can put a virtual hard drive on here. The advantage of a virtual hard drive, once you get it installed, you can always copy it. You can image a computer and send it from one to the other. A virtual hard drive, you can do a copy and paste, and you can have it in multiples. Your virtual machines, the ones that you got right now, actually, they all come from a central resource. You'll have to install the operating system. But a lot of times when we give you one that's got XP on it or Windows 7 on it or whatever, they all start out from a single machine, and everybody starts out with the same machine. And you move on from there. Ultimate includes the same features as the Enterprise, but it's not licensed for the virtual desktop interface. That's the difference in those things. So back to the different areas: consumers, business, specialized enthusiasts, enterprise, emerging markets, and entry-level PCs. Different versions of these things, and also different prices. And the upgrade process, you can only go, typically in Microsoft, you can only go from same level to level, or you can go up. You can't, for instance, upgrade from Windows 7 Enterprise or Windows, let's say Vista. We're going to upgrade from Vista. We can't upgrade from Enterprise to Home Premium. You can't go down. You can only go up. We go from Home Premium to Enterprise, but we couldn't go in the other direction. So these versions, the same thing, and this is where we'll hopefully get through the 81 slides, help us out a little bit here. Windows 7 Home Premium, and you can read these things. With richer multimedia experience, kind of a sales pitch. The Aero interface, and this one didn't say 2 physical CPUs, the Home Premium. This means that the motherboard's got to have the 2 CPUs. If you have that, the operating system will support it. Support for tablet PCs, multi-touch control. So if you have a tablet, not a Surface, a tablet. Microsoft's tablets have been around for a long time, and I think I've told some of you, maybe all of you, the story, but you got to hear it again. First tablet PC that I ever saw, and virtual machine that I ever saw, and I didn't realize what I was looking at the time, was at the Virginia Beach conference, probably, I don't know, 10 years ago maybe. where a Microsoft rep was doing a demonstration, and he was running Windows XP, I think, on his tablet PC, and inside his tablet PC he was using a server. So he had both of them running on the same device, and it in fact was a tablet. So they've been around. Tablets support the operating system. It has to have support for the tablet. And the version is going to be one of those things that determines that functionality. Professional businesses, the big thing with professional, the big addition for businesses is that you can join an Active Directory domain, and that's the first one that allows that. 64-bit versions, 192 gigabytes of RAM. How much RAM does any 32-bit version support? Max.
It's 4 years.
4 gig, and that's a limitation. Actually, it's like 3.5 gig is what you really get.
Like 3.5. Won't register the first full
Yeah, but one of the 64-bit, 32-bit, big difference between those, the 64-bit version is the amount of memory that these things will support, the amount of memory that you can put in the system. Remote desktop hosting, when they say hosting, it means you can connect to it. It's allowing connection to it. The other ones all allowed you to connect from them. This one allows you to connect to it. Support for domain networking, location-aware printing. Location-aware printing is something that you have to configure. When we talk about printing, we'll discuss that a little bit. That's in a large enterprise. If you print someplace, where are you going to send your print job? You get this list of printers. The location-aware printing is supposed to find the printer that's closest to you based on the networking. Dynamic disk, and we'll talk about dynamic and basic disk whenever we get to the disk portion of it, and I think that's in week 3 when we get to those chapters when we talk about disk management. Windows XP mode is basically a built-in virtual machine. You have to add that to it. It doesn't come with it by default. Volume licensing for an enterprise. The way volume licensing works now typically is going to be through a key management server. What happens here is when we put a machine on the network, when we join the Active Directory domain, it automatically gets licensed by the license server in Virginia Beach, and the corporate headquarters pay Microsoft based on the number of licenses that are used in the company, and I think it's probably on a rolling basis because we add and take machines off in an educational environment quite frequently. The educational licensing with Microsoft is much more liberal than other licensing. And Microsoft licensing, by the way, is not the clearest thing in the world, and it does change. So that's something that you really have to keep up to date with. Enterprise available customer who purchase the software assurance from Microsoft, so we're going to have to purchase something else. Everything into professional, multi-language, Unix-based application support, BitLocker drive encryption. BitLocker drive encryption is really kind of cool. I've known a couple people that have used it. If something happens to that encryption key, you're kind of up that proverbial river without a paddle. The only thing you can do is start over. Wipe the disk out and reinstall everything. That kind of looking at, be sure you've got adequate backups and that you understand the process. Ultimate, basically the same thing as, again, the same as enterprise. Starter buyers, computers, reduced hardware specifications. Some of the features here, and these are for the not real powerful machines, is what they're built for. Home Basic, the N and K editions, one of these is for Korea and the other one is for Europe, for the European market. And that kind of gets involved in a lot of the lawsuits that Microsoft's been involved in with the bundling of Internet Explorer with it. That can you have your own browser? Do you have to install it? But these are specialized by country. In release, that do not allow Microsoft to bundle Windows Media, I said Internet Explorer, Media Player with other software as part of the operating system, and the K releases is only sold in South Korea. So those are all part of the controls that have gone into this thing. New features, 32 and 64-bit support, Aero. Aero, and I said most of these are new from XP because Aero was in Vista, wasn't it? We had that. A lot of this stuff was in Vista, but when we talk about new, and a lot of people really did skip Vista, new from XP. .NET Framework, speech recognition, Internet Explorer, well, we're up to 11 now, I think, and does that sound right? 11, 10 or 11. User account control was introduced in Vista. User account control is when you try to do something that pops up and says, did you do this? Can be annoying. If you didn't do that, don't tell it yes. A lot of people do. They just say yes for everything. If it pops up, did you do this? If you didn't do it, somebody's giving you a virus, which they'd be very happy for you to take, or something else is going on. But do those things. It's just like, I digress again, just like when you go to a secure website and it pops up and says there's something wrong with the certificate. You know the reason it pops up and says there's something wrong with the certificate? There's something wrong with the certificate. Could be something inconsequential, could be something very hazardous. We just did, I just finished a security class, we just did one that can't enable a man-in-the-middle attack. We went to a secure site. It popped up and said, and it was put in a password. We're going to the Moodle site, which is secure authentication. It said, there's something wrong with the certificate, dude. And then all I had to do was click, go anyway, cracked my secure password. I went back and looked at can't enable, I already had it. When these things pop up, they pop up for a reason. And there's a lot of people out there just saying, okay. Clickies. Just click yes. There's a lot of them out there, and they're going to give you a lot of business over the years.
So it's almost like the blue pill, red pill.
Yeah. Repair, that's the other one's down here, Windows driver. Repair and restart improvements really are. It has ability, one of the things that it has the ability to restore a backup without actually installing the operating system. In Windows XP, if you had, or Windows, even Server 2003, if you made a backup, making your backup your whole operating system, and your machine crashed, the first thing you had to do was install Windows before you could restore the backup, unless you had a third-party software. In this one, when you boot to the installation media, one of the options is to restore from my backup, and you can restore it from the image that you made with the backup that you created. And they're a little picky about where the backups can go. Like you can't back up the tape anymore, which is with the built-in stuff. Rapid deployment, BitLocker, trusted platform modules services. The TPM is the TPM's related to BitLocker because what it does is the built-in holding spot for the encryption key that we do these things with. And network connectivity, I don't know why it's new and enhanced. Network connectivity has been around since a long time when we do these things. 32 and 64-bit, I think we talked about that in the A+. The advantage, 64-bit, if you have 64-bit capability, that's where you want to be. What we're really talking about is how many ones and zeros can go into the CPU at any time. So how big is the word? What's the word size? 64-bit is where you want to do with those things. 192 gigabits of RAM again, and this has got the big B should be bytes, but it should be gigabits, right? And 192 gig of RAM. Not all software and hardware is compatible with these additions. Sometimes what we get into is a 32-bit software run on a 64-bit system, right? But a 64-bit program won't run on a 32-bit system. So you can run it at half speed, 32 to 64. The Windows 7 Upgrade Advisor, we're always going to have those, and you can download it. It'll probably going to tell you if you try to upgrade it, go through and do that for you anyway. The Upgrade Advisor will tell you what programs aren't going to work, what hardware you're going to have issues with. typically going to be drivers. With me, it's always the video driver, almost always the video driver. The rest of the stuff tends to be pretty standard, but the video has changed from one to the other. Aero, the visual theme. See, first we said it was a new addition, and now we say it was introduced in Vista. It was introduced in Vista. Pleasing user experience. Anytime you have pleasing user, pleasing, pretty, it takes CPU cycles to do that. Do you want to work or do you want it to look good? The default, by the way, for Windows is make it look pretty. You can configure it to make it more efficient, but the default is look good. I always go back in. I go back in. I do the one at home. I go back in and turn it to I don't remember what the words were, but anyway, most efficient. Instead of what in there, and there is an in between. You can pick what you want, and that's one of the things that you'll need to do to make your virtual machines. One of the post-install things you'll need to do on your virtual machines is turn the pretty off and turn the make it work harder on. The Aero interface, it's got all this see-through stuff, and you can. It is pretty. It really does look kind of neat. And Linux has got that now too, doesn't it? They don't call it Aero, but it's got the translucent windows. All of that stuff takes processing power when you do those things. The .NET framework, application programming. What's an application? What's an API? What's an application programming interface? What does it say? It's one of those things, right? What does it do? It interfaces with the programs. Way back when, in Windows 2000, was a departure from what they had done in the past. In the past, you could write programs directly to the hardware. Windows 2000 took that ability away, which really drove a lot of gaming programmers nutty, and not nutty, but they got really upset because they had to write to the application, the programming interface, which allows more control by the operating system. What it really means is somebody writes a bad piece of software, it's not going to crash your machine necessarily. You can get, you'll be able, there are a number of processes in there that allows that, but we can do that. But the other one down here is Windows Card Space. You get a little activity that you can do on that. It protects the user's digital identities. Between you and me and the fence post, I've tried to configure this thing. It never has done a whole lot for me. If you want something to manage your access, there are lots of softwares out there that will manage your passwords for you that you can put on your system. Speech recognition, kind of handy. I've never actually used it a whole lot. I don't know if anybody has, but it's Dragon. But it's better than it used to be. Speech recognition's been around for a long time. Good speech recognition hasn't really been around for a long time. Microsoft tends to buy specific elements to put into their it. Trainable supports spoken corrections, multiple languages. To me, if you can type a little bit, it's probably easier than tell it to go back and take this out and put that in. But if you can't type, good way to do it. Typical Windows operations commands are built in. Internet Explorer gets upgraded on a regular basis when this was done, and this was at the introduction. IE8 was the one that was there. Internet Explorer has done a lot to improve its security over the years. And if you read a lot of these, a lot of the security specialists, the three major browsers tend to go exchange places as which one's the most secure. This week it may be IE, next week it may be Chrome, the week after that it might be Firefox. So they're all much better than they had been. User account control is a security level. This is the one that did you do this pops up when you start something. You can configure this on a number of different levels. One of the ones is just leave me alone, don't even tell me. If you want to get infected, that's the one you want to use. The other thing that happens, and you probably have seen this, may have seen this, if you try to install anything on these computers, what happens?
It says
put in some credentials. put in administrative credentials that says that you can do this. And that's what Linux does by default, isn't it? Windows is configured where you always have to do is say OK. In Linux, you have to put in the super user's name and password, I believe. Does that sound right? All you Linux guys? This is, instead of the run as feature, this was the ability before this when you could run as a different user. You could right-click a shortcut and run as and put in the credentials and run it as a different user, which would allow you to be on the system as an ordinary user, and this would be an XP thing. And then if you needed to administer the computer without logging off, you could run it as an administrative user. Yes.
Are we out the week of Thanksgiving?
No. But I don't know why that's related to this.
Because we still don't have the class when Thanksgiving is here. You know what I'm saying?
To avoid frequent administrative prompts is added to privileges standard. You can configure that in a number of different ways. Fast user switching goes from one to the other. This is the first one that allows you in a domain to log on as a different user. XP, if you're in a domain and you want to be a different user, you have to log off and log on. When you do this, the other user is still logged on. Their stuff's still running. So you can go from one to the other. XP had fast user switching. This one allows you to toggle even when you join to a domain. The Windows driver foundations, the architecture replaces the Windows driver module. This is more in the weeds and something that, are we going to do a whole lot about? No, not really. Driver software has access to the computer's hardware. Two distinct modes, kernel mode and user mode. Kernel mode is the one that has access to the hardware. User mode is the interface with us when we do those things. User mode, pass request. And this is kind of a friend tells a friend. The user mode sends it on down the line until you actually get to the kernel mode. The kernel is the one that actually controls the hardware. If the user mode driver fails, it can be restarted. This does allow more service restart and fewer reboots than previous versions when you do those things. Some repair and restart improvements are available. You don't always have to, every time you do something, restart the computer, although sometimes you do, particularly on updates. Security updates are always going to be that way. Components designed to be modular and selectable. We can add things after it gets installed. We get a base install, and then you can add features after you get done. The Windows imaging format is what's used now. And that, by the way, when you buy a DVD and you get a Windows DVD, all of the versions are actually on the DVD. It depends on which license you put in, which of the versions you get installed. It's based on the licensing, except the one that I give you, it only has the Enterprise. Files necessary to install Windows 7 to the end user, and it acts as a library. So all of the stuff is there, and they have the instant update and all that other good stuff. BitLocker, encrypt the entire hard drive. This is not the only thing that does that. There are some open source softwares if you want to encrypt it, or if you just want to create an encrypted area, you can get those. You can use either one. The Trusted Platform module, a framework for hardware that detects low-level tampering before the operating system starts. It's generally related to the BitLocker. That the stolen computers can't be started. What smart cards and USB drives, or they have their hard drive encrypted, what it does is checks to be sure that this is the computer that it belongs in. If it's not the one it belongs in, it won't start the system. But the people steal the hard drive, steal the computer. I guess it was a security class. There was a few years ago, everybody's trying to hack all these servers and all that good stuff. And you know, if it was that easy, we'd all be in the Caribbean drinking Mai Tais, wouldn't we?
Well, I would be in Maui.
You'd be in Maui? No, they have extradition.
Yeah. I'll be, I don't know.
We'd be someplace that didn't have extradition, right?
Jamaica.
Probably out.
Yeah. But
Probably out in the Pacific.
a few years ago, instead of trying to steal the information and hacking in, you know, you got a bunch of you been in the military. What's the good way to get out of work? You just walk around with a clipboard, right?
Yeah, you gotta have coveralls on there.
Coveralls and a clipboard, right?
Yeah.
That's what the Army used to be with the clipboard.
That was me.
Yeah. Well, so what they did, and this was in one of the Australian cities in an airport, they just walked in and stole the servers.
Put your fatigues on and walk around with a
What
clipboard.
this prevents is taking that hard drive and putting in a different set of hardware and being able to get the information off of it. So it's related. TPM, BitLocker are all kind of related together. TCP/IP supports IPv6. So did the previous versions. You just have that. It's automatic in Windows 7. It's automatically installs the support. XP has IPv6 support, but you have to install it separately. Teredo, IPv4 to IPv6 translation. If you have and I know some of you haven't had networking, so what's all this IP stuff? This is the addressing that the system finds different computers with. And we're eventually going to have to go to the next version 6 from the one we have 4. What this does is translates one to the other so that you can have both protocols running simultaneously on a network. Location awareness, where it is in the network, report the status and the performance of each network, be aware of the networks around them, and that gets involved into, they talked about printer location. Windows Firewall, the firewall that's in this thing right now is pretty good. It has 2 versions, the Advanced Firewall, and you'll have an activity near the end of the course where you look at a firewall, do a little bit of firewall configuration. The way that's been done in the past is you say, hey, we want this application to be able to get through the firewall. This allows an actual firewall control by port, by different service. So it's a much more precise allowance if you go into the advanced firewall. If you just go into the one in the control panel, the regular firewall, you can get the regular, let this one run, let that one run, let this and that or whatever get through the firewall. Location-aware printing, based on the network location, the connection's established, it's supposed to find the printer that's nearest to you so that you don't have to go very far. I think it should find the printer farthest from you, and it'll be part of our physical education program, or, you know, be a feature there. You just wait till we get to printing and we do printer pooling. I'll have you guys running all over creation to find your print jobs.
We had to do that for
User interface. Huh?
I think we had to do that for network.
Yeah, probably printer pooling. Yeah.
We had to do that.
Notification areas, the start button. These are things that you've done. No really need to talk about that. Windows 8 did away with the start button. There are softwares out there that you can put it back in if you really want to. Jump lists are something that's kind of new. Does anybody use the jump lists? If you put like Microsoft Word on the taskbar, and the jump list, if you right-click on it, it'll show you the files that you recently opened, and you can go directly to them. Yeah, that's what the jump list is. It's just and it's all involved. It's just a different way. Just like I said earlier, this is a different way to show recently opened documents, isn't it? You know what that says? Content was recently opened, so it's just a different way to show recently opened documents. We changed the address and stuff. Help and support. Windows really does tend to have pretty good help function in the operating system itself. If you'll go to the help screen, there is a lot of good information in there. And the other thing that I would say, and some of you have done troubleshooting, is if something happens to you in Windows, you probably ain't first. So your friend and mine, Google, is a great place to go find things. Don't be afraid to use that because there's all sorts of stuff. Don't be like I had a class one time that's trying to, and this was in the early days of the internet, go search for something and it wasn't there. So they type the same words in a different order. Doesn't help. You've got to try a different search. There are a lot of sites out there that will help you with those. Say again?
Go to Microsoft too.
Yeah, Microsoft got a lot of stuff. Microsoft TechNet.Microsoft.com has lots and lots and lots of documentation. It used to not be free. It is now. So that's there. Just like Cisco. Cisco probably got everything that you'd ever want or need on their website. I mean, people say, oh, I got to have that book. Well, if you know how to go to the website or use Google, you really don't need those books. And it's my contention that you won't ever use them anyway. I think that A+ book makes a great doorstop. But how many of you have actually ever gone back and looked anything up in a book for real? That's good. So it's that's 20%.
Also, I'd like to point out that the stuff that I went back to look for, half of it I couldn't find.
Half of it you couldn't find, but I bet Google could.
Probably could, but I didn't have internet access.
We didn't have internet. Well, that would be one reason to do it. Gadgets are available, and you can add gadgets. You can go to the internet and get gadgets. When you do this, Vista had this sidebar over here that showed up where all these went. This one actually still has, if you look in the processes that are run, still has a sidebar that's running. So it takes some resources to do that. There are lots of gadgets that are available you can put onto this thing if you want them.
I had learning it, so
Yeah.
I actually kept my books
Yeah.
from the military and stuff,
Yeah.
just in case.
Oh, I kept all mine from college, and I know they're in the attic of the townhouse that we sold in Norfolk because I hadn't looked at them in however many number of years it had been then, and I figured I wasn't going to look at them again.
Yeah.
Taskbar, been there, done that. Nothing really magic about that. You can move it around or you can lock it if you want. I had a guy one time that always liked him in the at the top, so I could always tell which machine was his just by looking at it because his taskbar was at the top of it. In the notification area, the bottom right corner, the right of the taskbar, that will actually tell you if you have an issue with the system. It'll pop up. The little red flag means you probably should go look and see what's going on with the system. The Action Center gives you the notifications, and that all is available through that area. Snap and Shake. I actually had this. I took the Windows 7 and the Vista test. The Aero Shake. Anybody? What is the Aero Shake? Does it say there? If you grab it and shake a window, if they're open, it'll close them all. If you shake it again, it'll open them all. That's the magic Aero Shake. The Snap you probably have used to where you send them to one side or the other and you get multiple applications open on a single page. And that's got the wide screens, and they're wider today, I know. In this room, when we redid this, so that you could have the VM open on half of the screen, because we used to have the much smaller screens, the VM open on part of it and the labs open on the other part of it. Different look and feel. Windows hardware quality labs. This keeps changing. It used to be called the hardware compatibility list, and then went to the Windows catalog, and now it's a WHQL. If you want to see what has been approved by Microsoft, this is the list there. Just because it hasn't been approved by Microsoft doesn't mean that it won't work. What this means is that the manufacturer paid Microsoft to test it with that particular operating system, and because it works with one, doesn't mean it's going to work with the other one. The minimum requirements: a gigahertz CPU, a gig of RAM for 32-bit, 2 gig for 64-bit if you've got a lot of time to wait. These are the minimums. CPU, Aero capable, video RAM 128 meg, and then hard disk 16 gig for the 32-bit and 20 gig for the 64-bit. This free hard disk space is to copy the temporary files from the installation media to the hard drive while it does the install, and then it's supposed to delete those.
I actually upgraded my motherboard to the CPU while I was out.
Yeah.
I got like, now I got like 16 gigabytes.
Yeah. And then an optical drive, says an optical drive, you may or may not need that, depending on how you're doing the installation. And we'll look at some of those in the next chapter. 64-bit processor advantages, nothing magic there. You already know that, improved performance, more memory, better support, improved security. Does not support 16-bit Windows on Windows environment. That's a backward compatibility thing that they didn't do. If we had 16-bit, in the past we had 16-bit applications that run in what they call a Windows on Windows, a WOW, and that was the process that would be running if you looked at the task manager. Processor threads, typically grouped into units called threads. Threads are different components of a process. Multitasking gives the appearance that more than one thing's running at a time. But how many things can a CPU do at a time? One. It does it real fast, but it can only do one thing at a time. We have preemptive multitasking, allows a single process to be interrupted by other processes. What this thing works is on a priority system that eventually everything will get a little bit of CPU time, because for every clock cycle, everything's priority gets increased. So it gets its moment in the sun, it's CPU time, and then after that it goes back down to the bottom and starts working its way up. We have preemptive multitasking in these things. Processor affinity, if we have more than one processor, we can associate a process with a particular processor if you want to do those things. But that's processor affinity. Multiprocessor support, multiple physical processor support. Today's processors generally are going to have more than a single core. The multiprocessor is multiple physical processors, not multiple cores. In the past, and I don't know, I read something and I didn't read it completely, but in the past, Microsoft has licensed based on the number of physical processors, not the number of cores. I think they're changing that to number of cores instead of number of processors. Hyper-threading, allow more than one thread to be processed at the same time, and essentially what you're talking about is connections, multiple connections to the CPU, because when we look into these things, we have the ability to do more than one thing at a time with it. Multi-core and multi-processor, multi-core CPUs, we essentially put multiple processing cores inside a single physical container. Plug and play works real well now anymore, right?
Yeah.
Didn't used to. Power management, and it'll do its own power management. You can configure your power management. The processors now are kind of rateable, that you can regulate the amount of power that each one, particularly in laptops, how much, and will turn the power back. What this really means is you don't really get all that much advantage by turning your computers off, because it'll go into like a sleep mode that really takes essentially no power at all. We still shut these machines down every night with a centrally from the domain controller, runs a script, and all the machines get shut down, and then the BIOS brings them all up in the mornings. Drivers to better integrate with the operating system. One of the little things that I've noticed about this is when you install a NIC, the default is let Microsoft manage it. You may or may not want it to manage the power to your NIC, because if it turns it off, you're not going to be able to connect to it remotely unless you can send it what's called a magic packet, which gives it a wake up, and that all has to be configured to allow it to wake up while it's asleep on the network. First time I got exposed to that was a long time ago, when it was a much simpler thing, and we didn't use magic packets, we just looked at activity. We put a domain controller, it was actually a NetWare server in over there in the electronics lab for them, and turned it off and started to walk out of the room, and the server came on. Turned it off, and the server came back, and it's like it's infected. The BIOS was configured to allow network traffic, any network activity to start the computer. So what we use today when these go to sleep is you may have to wake them up. You can wake them up externally with a packet, but they have to be configured to accept that packet, and they call that the magic packet. Tablet hardware, if we're going to configure those things, they're really pushing their own hardware set now instead of the older tablet computers. But you do have to have support in the operating system for the tablets. Media hardware, media center, computer part of the entertainment system, and I think a lot of you do that. This is one of the areas that probably is growing pretty rapidly in the IT world, is home entertainment centers, integrating those things, building them, setting them up, so that people have those things. Multi-monitor support. As long as the hardware does this, and we found that out in A+, right? When we put that you have to have that there, it'll essentially just be there. The multi-monitor support. Laptops are pretty easy. Plug into the VGA and you have multi-monitor. You can either have them to both show to echo, which is what is happening here, because you have the same picture on the monitor over here as we have up here on the screen, or you can have it extended across so that you can drag and have multiple applications on the multiple desktops. Network card design, wireless is there. I mean, and these things you probably have already configured. The wireless really is much easier than it ever, for me at least, it had been in the past. Disk technology, IDE, SATA, SCSI, USB, supports all of those different controllers. Virtual hard disks are supported by Windows 7. VHD is just an area reserved on the disk for control. It's a file. That's why virtual machines are a lot easier to kind of use in an environment like this, because if something happens to it, we can recreate one pretty quickly. I would say disk partitioning styles, firmware built in. We'll do these, talk about these more when we get to the disk management. We're going to have two disks, a basic disk and a dynamic disk, when we create these things. UEFI, BIOS and UEFI. UEFI is the newer alternative to the firmware, and this has got lots of stuff built into it, lots of controls, lots of drivers and so on, which is replacing the BIOS, although we still call it the BIOS, but it really is UEFI. Basic disks and dynamic disks. When we talk about disks, there are two types. Basic disks we start out with. Dynamic disk allows the really clever stuff to happen, like you have to convert it so that you can do RAID, for instance. File systems, FAT16, FAT32, exFAT. exFAT is something that was added that is essentially is FAT32. Unless you got a good reason to use a FAT, a file allocation table system, don't do it, because it has no security. What we're going to use is NTFS, newer version of NTFS. NTFS stands for New Technology File System. NT4. Well, actually NT 3.5, but NT 3.5 didn't work real well. NT4 was the first one that they were actually very successful with. NT4. NT4 is really where most of it begins. NT 3.5 was the first one. NT4 has been around since, well, I don't know if anybody's still using it, but it was around in the 90s. We'll look at all of this functionality when we do file systems, and NTFS is the one that we will look at. CDFS for the CD file system. UDF, and they go on forever. Compatibility settings. If you have things that have to run in compatibility mode, you can configure it to do that. You can also configure things to run as administrator. if they need to do that. Program Compatibility Wizard, unsuccessful, reports the results to Microsoft. The ability to guide the user through different compatibility settings if you need to use that. Usually it's just a matter of clicking on it, picking which one that you need if you know which one it is. Otherwise, you can do the wizard. Virtual PC is a product from Microsoft. You may or may not use that. XP mode is something that's installed on these things automatically to run a virtual machine. Virtual PC, VMware, they're competitors. There are other virtualization softwares, there's 3 or 4 different virtualization softwares that you can use. Virtual PC allows you to create and manage machines. Kernel and user mode, kernel direct, or I said that direct access to hardware user interface is what we use. It goes through a series of links to actually get the hardware to do what it wants to do. Ring levels, so we can talk about that. Virtual PC hypervisor, ring 0, ring 1. This ring 0 is these rings of go back to mainframes. Ring 0, virtually expects ring 0. Ring 1 is virtual security with more permissions than ring 1, so how much access does it get is what we're really talking about in these different rings. Remote desktop, remote assistance, network projection, home groups. These are, again, things that we'll talk about as we get to them when it goes through here. Remote desktop and remote assistance. Remote desktop allows me to connect to a machine and manage it. Remote assistance is the ability to ask for help. And there are other ways. It's built in, but there are other ways to do that also. Lots of those available. Remote desktop was Windows Professional on up. The home versions you can connect from it, but you can't connect to it. Can ask for help from a trusted professional over the network, and these are generally going to be on your local network because what they typically are going to do is send the private IP address. Easy Connect allows it to be discovered. Projection, and this is something that they really talk about, included in these things, allows you to find a projector on the network. Home groups we talked about a little bit earlier. We'll configure those when we get into the networking portion of the class. The networking models, kind of talked about these: work group, domain model, and peer-to-peer. Work group is a bunch of machines that all have the same administrative grouping name, and they can share information as long as every user has a username and password on every machine. Domain model is what we use here, central authentication server that allows you to centrally manage it. Peer-to-peer networking, computer to computer, one-to-one typically. Workgroup model and peer-to-peer, not a whole lot of difference in them because it's a computer to computer without a centralized authentication server. The managing a work group can be difficult because however many users you have to have those users on every machine in the system to do that. It should be limited to 10 to 20 computers. That's only because of the number of connections. That's not a networking limitation because you can have. It's based on the number of connections you can have to any of the workstations. The domain model, centrally managed, typically in a business environment, you add Active Directory to a server and then the machines join and get managed through, like these machines do, where you can't do stuff, you can do certain stuff, but you can't do other things. But when you log on, regardless of which computer you're at, you get logged on, right? Because of the domain controller, as long as the cable's plugged in, right, Joe? As long as it doesn't give you a no authentication server available, which is typically going to be that. Primary domain controllers and backup domain controllers, old terms. Primary is the old term for one that was read-write. A backup domain controller was one that was read-only, was just put in for authentication purposes to allow users to log on from different locations. Multi-master replication, nice terms. Get to Active Directory, we'll talk about that. configure that. What that really says is that we can have lots of different domain controllers and we can make changes on any of them, and it'll figure it out. The multi-master, there's not just one server that you can make changes on. Peer-to-peer, scalable from the LAN to the internet as long as they communicate using IPv6, so that's going to be their requirement for peer-to-peer. Teredo is something that IPv6 to be embedded in IPv4 encapsulation would be another term for it, where you put a, you're going from one to the other, you either put a 4 header on a 6 packet and goes through the 4 network and it gets stripped off when you get to the 6 network, or the other way around, depending on which way you're going from to. And you thought we'd never get to the summary slide, didn't you? It's almost over. It's just beginning. This is where we're going to go. Now we're going to go into each of those areas. We'll go through each of those areas through the course. The different versions, Aero, nice to look at, but it's going to take away from your performance. Yeah, and that's the term they use. Maximal performance, or look pretty, or maximum performance when we look at those things. Start menu, the things about that. I think that, and most of you have been using 7 for a while. I think it's 7 probably the best one that they ever introduced. Vista, they have admitted, wasn't really ready for prime time. XP up until that time was, a lot of people liked XP, stayed with XP for a long time. A number of companies really are just going to 7 from XP right now, because XP did the job for them up until it's no longer going to be supported, and it's time to move on to Windows 7. Are they going to go to Windows 8? Yeah, good question. For those of you who use Windows 8, have you noticed a whole lot of difference between 7 and 8?
I think 7's much easier to use.
7's easier to use? Yeah.
I think I have a faulty laptop as well, so.
I don't know, it all depends on the experience level with the OSs and how you like that.
Well, if you look at these things, Windows NT 4.0 was NT 4, and then we had those things. Windows 2000 was Windows NT 5.0. Windows XP was Windows NT 5.1. Windows Vista was Windows NT 6.0. Windows 7 was Windows NT 6.1. And I believe that Windows 8 is Windows NT 6.2. When you look at the way they're really classified.
That's your, like, framework, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the real basics of it.
I feel
Yeah,
like,
For your house.
So how much have they really changed? I kind of like 8 once I get a real start menu on it.
yeah. I kind of feel like 8's working against me most of the time.
And that's easy to do if you fight it, because it really should be on a tablet, because all of that stuff is swipeable.
We're using the mouse with 8.
Say again?
We're using
We're using a mouse with 8. Depends on whether you put one of the, if you do one of the third-party start menus or not.
I mean, I haven't tried with Classic Shell at all, so that's my...
Classic, if you don't like it in the original, give Classic Shell a shot. And if you don't like it, you can always take it off because it's a program.
Okay. Windows 8, they're charging for Windows is charging for it. Keep this in mind, but they're actually doing a classic shell for Windows 8 themselves. Servers.